If you're thinking the title Assault Suit Leynos sounds familiar, then that's probably because you've heard it before. It started life as an early release for the Sega Megadrive in 1990, and if I had to describe it in simple, relatable terms, I think I'd have to say that it's basically the closest thing you could get on the console to playable giant robot anime. Or at least, it was the closest thing you could get to that at the time of its release. A few years later, Ranger X would come along and blow us all away with its expanded control scheme that made use of the newer 6-button Megadrive controllers. But Leynos, or Target Earth as it was retitled for Western release, was decent enough in its own right. It was an ambitious game for its time, with a gnarly storyline that wouldn't have felt out of place in a Japanese mecha show, like Mobile Suit Gundam or Super Dimensional Fortress Macross, and it wasn't afraid to push past the usual constraints of side-scrolling run-and-gun games either, mixing up playstyles to service its mission-based structure. But for all that, I don't actually recall the game being an especially big deal. If anything, it mostly seems to be remembered for being extremely difficult. Evidently though, it must have found a following, because it spawned several sequels across different consoles, and in 2016, it received a PlayStation 4 remaster courtesy of DreQ Software, which gave fans another chance to chew through it, and the game itself a chance to push past the limitations of its earlier 16-bit outing. I've got to admit, when I first saw that Assault Suit Leynos had been dusted off for a PS4 remake, it came as a bit of a surprise. Of all the games from its era, this isn't one I ever would have thought would benefit from a shiny HD rebuild. But now that I've had a chance to play said rebuild, I have to say, I wish I'd had this version of it in my life a lot sooner. If only so that I'd had time to get to grips with its learning curve. Don't be deceived, Leynos might look like a simple side-scrolling shooter, but it's the kind of game that makes very imaginative use of its premise, and it's quite demanding, at least initially, thanks to the way it controls. There's quite a bit to learn here. Your on-screen alter ego, the assault suit of the title, isn't just an animated robot. It handles like a mechanical killing machine, with all the requisite tools to get the job done. You can get up close and personal for close quarters combat as well, punching enemy robots and guarding against their attacks with your optional shield. The shield's also good for deflecting arms fire, so don't leave home without it. It's important to bear in mind that this isn't a full tilt run and gun game like, say, Contra or Metal Slug. It's got a much heavier feel to it, with in-game physics that really evoke the feeling of piloting a bulky war robot. Your movements have a certain weight and stompiness to them, which makes your assault suit feel just like what it's supposed to be, a tank made in the image of man. As you play through each mission, you're given set objectives, and these dictate directly to the feel of each stage. The first, for example, tasks you to take down an attacking warship before it levels your moon base. In the second stage, you're required to protect a convoy of evacuees as you make your escape. And in the third, which is my favourite part of the whole game, you have to protect your escaping spaceship from attacking enemies as you re-enter the Earth's orbit. The way each stage plays off the last as you progress, with a full pre-mission briefing and frequent alerts and radio messages in-game, means there's a really strong narrative thread to Assault Suit Leynos, in spite of its comparatively old-school gameplay. There's an element of strategy involved too, when it comes to selecting your weapons at the start of each stage. Here, you have to strike a balance between knowing what's best for your own playstyle and what's most appropriate for the needs of the mission. You should be prepared for some trial and error, as some loadouts are simply no good for certain missions, but I think experimenting and learning what works and what doesn't is all part of the fun. What I really like about this version of Leynos though is that besides preserving the challenging gameplay and interesting approach of the original, it goes some way to improving on it in a meaningful way. I'm not just talking about its upgraded aesthetics here. In fact, even though the music and sound effects are great, I'm not actually that impressed with the revamped visuals. I wouldn't say it looks bad, but the way everything's animated makes it look to my eyes like the world's fanciest Flash game, with robots that look very obviously made up of layered static elements, and some of the larger enemy ships having a lifeless cardboard cutout look to them. Visually, it isn't really to my liking, but I can look past that, because the way it feels and plays most definitely is. Like I say, this game takes a while to get to grips with, and as you're learning how to capably control your assault suit, early on it can be quite frustrating. But it's worth sticking with, because once you've become proficient and you find yourself taking down robots, tanks, jet fighters and whatever else with more practiced ease, it becomes very satisfying. And thankfully, the single biggest improvement that's been made here is that although the controls take time to get comfortable and familiar with, they're a huge improvement over the Megadrive originals. As a result, this PS4 version feels like the game that one was always trying to be. It's easier to play, more fun, and it's more rewarding. Speaking of rewards, there's a ton of stuff to unlock, which gets parcelled out to you as you play the game over time and meet certain requirements. So, even though the game is still tough as nails, you're always getting something back for your perseverance, whether it be something you can visually tweak in the game, or even parts of the old 16-bit soundtrack. Even the laser sight you see fitted to my assault suit's rifle in the captured footage here is an unlockable feature, and let me tell you, it makes life a lot easier. As nice as all these things are though, I really think the most rewarding aspect of this version of Leynos is simply the feeling you get from making progress through it. Because it's a game that takes effort to play well, puts up quite a fight, and makes your victories in each of its stages feel well earned. And that's a quality I really enjoy about these games that harken back to the old days. Given the enormous wealth of technically dazzling, expansive, story-driven games available for the PS4, I'm sure some folks will take one look at Assault Suit Leynos and wonder what place it has alongside them. But it's not a game to be judged by outward appearances, and I think there's always been more going on under the surface with Leynos than most action games of its time could claim. The question hanging over it is whether it deserved to be pulled out of the vaults and dressed up for a new lease of life more than 20 years after its initial release. When an older game gets rebuilt and given a fresh lick of paint like this, presentation is only worth so much. Core gameplay is what counts, and that needs to be either left unchanged or improved upon. And I do believe that, in this case, transplanting the game from Sega's 16-bit console to Sony's hardware really gives it an opportunity to shine. It's become a game I feel I can play and enjoy now, as opposed to one I dimly remember struggling with on the Megadrive in a very physical, unenjoyable sense. Undeniably, it's a bit of an oddity, but I'm a fan of such things, and having been so intelligently retooled, the impression I'm left with is that it's an oddity in the best possible way. If you've ever been curious about Assault Suit Leynos, I reckon this is the best way to check it out.
S3 作戦範囲を超えています。できるだけバー室に接近してください。いや、まだだ。こいつらを落とす。タイムアウトすると収容できません。帰還してください。